Hello, everyone. Welcome to this BAKERpedia seminar on all about seasonal treats. My name is Richard Charpentier, CMB, owner of Baking Innovation, and I'm your host for today. The seminar is brought to you by Balchem. Balchem Human Nutrition and Health provides solutions that delight and nourish, from indulgence and sensory experiences to the rigors of targeted essential nutrition. Their proprietary controlled release encapsulation technology minimizes the unwanted side effects, food acids, and preservatives during the baking process. And it's also brought to you by Arla Foods Ingredients. Arla Foods Ingredients is a leading whey ingredient supplier for infant nutrition, baking, dairy, medical application, and sports nutrition. We've known for having the industry's highest level quality, innovation, and food safety. Their functional and nutritional whey proteins, milk, minerals, lactose, and whey permeate can promote nutrition, improve texture, prolong freshness, and increase yield for industrial food products. Now, let's dive into the world of seasonal treats and their commercial production. Welcome to Seasonal Treats, brought to you by Balchem and Arla Food Ingredients. So today in the agenda, we'll go through the introduction of what are seasonal treats, the definition and types of different seasonal treats, the ingredients that are, the core to building seasonal treats in your bakery, and some formulation ideas at the end. Let's get right into it. So how can you prepare for your seasonal treat baking? So for the next 20 to 30 minutes, we'll go through the agenda, going through the different, what's a seasonal treat, to what are the ingredients making a seasonal treat, to what are the ideas around different seasonal treats. So let's get right into it. So seasonal treats. So today in the industry, we looking at seasonal treats as a market trend and opportunity. I love researching, the history of baking, and seasonal treats were started as a way to preserve, right? If you think the apple season, people will learn baking 10,000 years ago, and we'll take a bunch of apple and put some fat, and apple pie became seasonal because it was relating to a season. So seasonal has a lot of historical ties to the industry, but regardless of the history today, it's roughly of an $80 billion market industry. It's a growing market. You've heard all about, snacking and trending, on-the-go snacks. Seasonal treats can take an opportunity into the market. A lot of consumers today are worried about health concerns, which again brings some great innovative examples of how people could make seasonal treats. A muffin could be made a muffin with vegetable powders to go for the people who want that. Keto is something that also has made a strong splash in the industry, showing that innovation can disrupt. So seasonal treats can be applied to any full products. It demands innovation, and it doesn't require much for any operation to implement. So what are they? As we said, it's basically bringing seasonal fruits, seasonal seasons. I'll give you a great example. Starbucks, the pumpkin spice latte. And I've learned the pumpkin spice latte, also PSL, as people, the really hardcore people refer to. It brings 10% of Starbucks revenue. I know it's Starbucks, but it generates about, for Starbucks on their level, $3.2 billion just with a seasonal item. So the power of seasonal item is more than we think. It's more than just summer. It's fall, winter, spring season. Look at Peeps coming in the Easter time. There's many and countless examples of strong brands that have implemented seasonal. And from my experience as a baker and also having led large bakery companies with R&D, we were strong in seasonal items. We had our core items and we had seasonal. Those were sort of, as we refer to, limited time offer, or it could be an everyday item because there's someone that will feel the nostalgia towards a certain product. So now let's get into the ingredients. In order to make any seasonal products, for all of us bakers, it takes in by starting with ingredients. So one of the most well-known that contributes to basically the baseline of baking, since 30,000 years ago when we discovered that wheat could create a gluten structure. It could, once baked, it could transform itself. It could take on water. So as an ingredient alone, wheat is quite remarkable. It contains wheat protein. It has bran and germ. Most often in seasonal treats, it's being removed, but it can contribute to the texture of a product. It can give it some color, and also it's good in fermentation with yeast fermentation to really allow the entrapment of gas that allows for the rise and giving the volume to bread. Wheat is used everywhere. When you use wheat, it's good to specify what wheat because not all wheat are created equal. So always talk to your millers and ask to your ingredient vendors what would be the best specs for what you're trying to make. Personally, I have a milling background. I spent countless hours working in determining what's the best quality flour I can get for my product. Same as you would not be making a high artisan bread with an all-purpose flour. You might use a higher protein or to make a bagel or to give it the chewiness. And in the cake, you would prefer a spring wheat or lower protein. And sometimes you have for cakes, for high ratio cakes, you can have the chlorinated flour, which is the miller go through an extra step to chlorinate the flour, allowing flour to take on more sugar than a normal flour would do. So choosing and picking the right flour is important to start your thinking of how to make seasonal treats. So the next, and as equally important, if not more important as your flour, it's your water. Water, even though flour overall in the bread is what 60% of the total formulation is flour. In the cake is going to be 40 to 50%. Now we're getting to water, making most of the rest, right? And I'll see other ingredients, but it makes a big bulk. And water is very crucial. Why? Because water from any different facilities in the world, water varies in minerality, varies in hardness, softness, and varies in pH. So it's always very important to know because it's great, water, all ingredients, raw commodity ingredients are nothing without water. Once we put it together, we form a dough. So it's essential to know how your water works. And like I said, the pH of your water, the softness of your water, and the quality of your water. Again, check with your local water cleaning treatment plant and ask for the report. Everyone is entitled, even as a homeowner, you can request in your hometown the water report. So please do it for yourself because sometimes as activation of yeast, if your water is not properly balanced for your yeast, it would create other potential problems. But let's move on to the next ingredient, fat. Everybody loves fat, right? Because it will give it that tenderness. It would give it that perfect, a nice brioche, that texture that you're looking for the fat. It brings a lot of flavor and richness. But like water, there are many, many different types of fat you can use to make your seasonal treats. What are the different types? The most obvious and the one that was used for years and years, way before our time, butter has been used extensively. And butter, because of its solid content, it's great to make the loving croissants that everybody loves, or puff pastry, or even in a brioche to give that rich, buttery, dairy note. And plus, with all the beta carotene naturally present in butter, it brings that yellow color that everybody likes to see. But not everybody can use butter. Butter might be better to be used for products with a shorter shelf life. When it comes down to maybe formulating for cookies and other things, there's a lot of equivalent like a palm shortening or different margarine that can work equally well at a different cost, but they all serve different purposes. And I even mentioned the liquid fats, such as vegetable oil, corn oil, soybean oil, which are heavily used also in the bakery industry. So your choice of fat is depending on what you're trying to create. Are you trying to create a crisp? My rule of thumb is simple. What I do is any fat at room temperature, if you bring a butter or palm shortening at room temperature, it's a solid. Once you apply heat, it turns into a liquid. But fats tends to revert back to their natural state in different crystal formation. So think about it. So a butter will try to revert back, slightly different, but back to a solid. Same with a palm, same with high melt point shortening. So it's always helping me to think of what kind of texture am I trying to achieve and what fat will I use. But now moving on to sugar. Well, everybody loves sugar. Sugar has been around for a long time. Sugar contributes to the obvious, which is sweetness, but it also helps with caramelization. It helps with color. It helps with texture. It can help with shelf life done properly. And sugar, similar to flour or fat, there are many different variations. Sugar is a term to describe a sweetness. The granulated we know is basically the white sugar. It's 99.9% pure sucrose. There's a lot of different forms of sucrose in nature. There is fructose, which is mostly common in fruit puree, apple puree, which is also a sugar. Maltose is a sugar. Lactose is a sugar. All are sugar, but all perform differently, similarly to the fat, similarly to flour. Picking the proper sugar for your product will help you. I would always use humecting sugar like a corn syrup or a honey or a more liquid sugar to help bring extra moisture feel because there is moisture in the product. So, and as you're formulating, if you're formulating for long shelf life, we're looking at moisture management. So moisture management meaning trying to keep as much moisture in my product for as long as I can. And it's a part of life, right? It's dry, you add the water, but eventually the water will move on and, between free and bond water. Now that we've gone through all the main ingredients to build structure, so other ingredients such as yeast, they contribute to transforming the product into something different. In the case of yeast, which is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is a name for brewer's yeast that has been used for many years when we would take it from wild yeast. But yeast is not only called a yeast, it's in a family of fungi. It's the mushroom family. Basically, it would grow. The yeast manufacturer will make the yeast for you and grow it for our convenience. And it's actually a novel, it was something that was introduced in the US in 1876 by the Fleischmann brother, which before that, nobody really had access to commercial yeast. We either had to make it ourselves or we had to use a sourdough. So, but yeast can, as I'm mentioning, can come in different form. It can come from a sourdough and in the form of commercial yeast. It comes in a dry active, dry instant, fresh compressed yeast, or liquid cream yeast for industrial bakers. But technically, it serves the purpose of once in your dough format with the water and all the other ingredients that we listed through, the yeast will start performing and start eating the available sugar or the available maltose in your products to generate CO2, gas, and alcohol, and lowering the overall pH. So they're wonderful because without yeast, we'd get no bread. So whichever yeast you prefer, whether it's sourdough fermentation or yeast, they perform the same, except in the sourdough, you still have lactic acid bacteria, which is not common to commercial yeast. Another close cousin to the yeast, because they're performing technically the same functionality, generating CO2 to create expansion. And actually, the baking powders, as we know, which are chemical leavening, we're leavening through a chemical reaction. As a yeast, it's a biological reaction happening when the yeast, that are living organisms, are starting to work. So it's very important to differentiate both. Both of them will generate CO2 and give you volume, but both of them will give you different results in terms of flavor and other aspects of chemical leavening. Chemical leavening come in different forms, from the fast reacting, because it's how much CO2 they're releasing, to the slower one that are used mostly for refrigeration, frozen dough, that people are doing for biscuit and type of item. And they both can be, the difference is on the yeast, you'll get down to about a lower pH, as baking powder tends to have a different finish pH. So it's important to understand that as you're developing for products and seasonal, especially products with a higher moisture or higher water activity. Now, who could make a good cake or a good brioche without eggs? Eggs are amazing ingredients. And as a good friend of mine said, he said, remember, chicken, we're not born to lay eggs to make cakes. So it's true, as bakers, we tend to say the chicken are working for the bakers, because they're giving us the eggs to make the aeration, to make Genoise cake, to make angel food cake with the egg white. So many possibilities and so many creation, again, historically speaking, that we've been using eggs, butter, milk, and all the essential ingredients to create the first cakes. And that's what makes it taste good. Eggs are great binders. They're great structure builders. And let's keep in mind that in the egg, you have the whole egg, which is including the egg white and the egg yolk. People sometimes use it in many recipes by separating the just egg yolk and egg white. Some recipes, in case of angel food cake, would require only egg white, and some cakes will require only egg yolk. So it's good to know that they serve a very much different purpose in your finished product, whether or not the egg white has a tendency to toughen and the egg yolk has a tendency to soften. So softener and toughener. And a quick example, when you crack an egg, and if you make, a sunny side up egg, which I like, put it in the pan, the white gets solidified white tough quicker, and then you can move it around, and as the yolk stays soft. So just think about it as you're formulating. They serve a different process. And again, eggs, similarly to all the other ingredients, come in different forms. They come in dry powdered forms. Some come with liquid form with sugar added to it. Some come pasteurized, some come acidified, some come enriched, so frozen. So the egg you will use will give a little bit of difference overall. Functionality wise, they all function the same. It will change in terms of taste and maybe texture. And as a preference, if you're thinking of product with a long shelf life, we're talking 6 months plus, I always prefer powdered eggs, because flavor deteriorates similar to in butter. The volatile compound will deteriorate over time, making it different. Difficult to keep that fresh flavor of eggs, a fresh flavor of butter in a baked product, in a seasonal baked product. So, and our good friend salt, salt, fat, and sugar, it's basically pillars of development for product development. It's pillars to a little bit of salt goes a long way. And that's what's nice about salt, is finding that basically right amount of salt to bring the harmony between all the flavors together. And sometimes, you know, a little bit of salt is going to round off different flavors. In bread, it's used to also control fermentation and yeast fermentation. And too much will be bad for your fermentation, and not enough will accelerate your fermentation process. But in cakes, it serves more of a flavor delivery and giving you that nice flavor you're looking for. And in gluten, if you ever did any experiments, you know, I come from France where I was trained all throughout my apprenticeship program that it's very important to delay the salt. I know there's school of thoughts of people say, why delay the salt? But it's to allow the protein and the starches to fully hydrate before you bring the salt. Salt and sugar have a tendency to really pull a lot of water away from the other ingredients and disrupting proper gluten development. So there, and like we said, you know, and it can, salt can prevent shelf life. Like back in the days, they'll salt fish, they'll salt meat to preserve it for a longer time. It has an antimicrobial activity at high level, but it's beyond the level we use for normal sweet baked goods. Spices. Well, spices is basically, you know, all the other ingredients, it's up to you. And spices is going to be what makes your product unique, what makes your product a seasonal treat. So when we think of seasonal treats, we think of warm, cozy fireplace, eggnog, things that, you know, brings nostalgia, brings, you know, ties you to a product and you're like, I want to make it unique. And I think in the obvious of adding flavor, adding aroma, and creating uniqueness into your seasonal products, it can also differentiate your product from everybody else. That could be the key to the secret recipe for, you know, you could have all the rest could be the same, but that flavor is unique. And remember, consumers, we use our senses. And if it tastes good one time, you'll go back and say, I want to go back again because of the flavor delivery. Yes, fat, yes, sugar and salt contribute to that. But a seasonal treat with that spices is not a seasonal treat. So think about it. We have your cinnamon, you have your nutmeg, you have your cardamom, you have your allspice, and you have so many, you know, like I personally like to use cayenne pepper or chili powder, you know, just a little bit to accentuate, to bring a little spicy, sweet and spicy. There's so much fun we can have playing with spices. But spices, and now we have emulsifiers. Emulsifiers are there to basically bring the water in your system and hold it to bring an emulsion between oil and water. Without it, what happens if you put oil and water? It separates, they go all over the place. So as you're mixing it, the emulsifiers are really working to help out tie everything up, slowing down, controlling the moisture to release quicker, and helping with tenderness and the texture identity of the cake and preserving the texture of breads for a longer time so you get the same chew. So emulsifiers, we could be talking for hours and hours on emulsifiers alone. There are so many different great emulsifiers that you can acquire from the ingredient suppliers. But again, based on history and what I've seen, eggs were always used as great emulsifiers, which people are still using it, thinking of clean label. You know, you can use lecithin coming from soybean or sunflower today if people did not want to use eggs. So I think lecithin is a good emulsifier, but it might not be the emulsifier you're looking for. So that's why, you know, doing the proper product development and taking the time to really think and what ingredients do I need and what's the functionality. Very important as you know, when you develop a renovation of new formulation, it's important to think of all the steps of what are the ingredients, what are the functionality, and what is the end goal. Throwing a lot of things at an ingredient, at a formula might not solve it, but thinking through it might save you a lot of time along the way. And now for inclusions found in seasonal treats. I think it's the fun. It's the, like they say in baking, the cherry on top of the cake, right? It's that makes it look like in the Black Forest cake, and you know that beautiful cherry sitting on top. That's the first thing we see. Again, using the senses, the visual, the taste, the smell. You know, engage your consumer with the visual. Put lots of, you know, nuts to so it shows that it's rich. You know, sometimes even putting, you know, there's the M&Ms, but putting fruits, putting nuts inclusions, and you have to find a way to include different inclusions into your products to create textural differences. You know, in the case of nuts, you know, if you have a soft sponge cake with sort of a almond or crunch, it creates different dimension within the experience of the consumer. And as a product developer, I'm always thinking, what could I use inclusion for, and how could I really elevate the seasonal treats that I'm trying to create by using inclusion? So at that point, you have to be the artist, you have to be the creator, and think, what if and experiment, just play around with different textures and flavors, and then you till you get the product, you say, this is it. And I think that taking the time to do so will make a difference in how the success of a product will be once in the market. And today we're also talking about encapsulation. We're talking about all of those great ingredients and how to formulate and the different options that we have as bakers and product developers to create seasonal treats. Encapsulation is very interesting because as you want long shelf life, it's very difficult to do it alone. You have to have the other ingredients helping you in your process to, one, for shelf life, you have starch retrogradation, and then you have mold growth. Mold growth, you can put a lot of vinegar, but it's going to disrupt your cake. And a lot of people are using sorbic acid alone, which disrupts your cake. That's why in that case, I know it's coming from Balchem, where they take encapsulating sort of the sorbic acid particles and different level of encapsulation, meaning that once it goes into the oven and your starch is pre-gelatinizing, pasting and turning into a cake, building the structure, even with the eggs, you're not disrupting the whole buildup or the structural buildup of the cake during the baking process with changing the pH of your batter, which is not a good thing. You're losing volume, you're losing texture. So encapsulating ascorbic acid is going to help you alleviate some of those ordeal that you're seeing in the bakery and making it easy. What else can you encapsulate? There's many things that can be encapsulated. On that point, I would ask Balchem and your ingredient vendors for other acid they can encapsulate, you know, for slower release. It's basically the encapsulation allows for slower release and sometimes a release over time in the case of shelf life, protecting your finished products longer and better through the novel technology of encapsulation. Now let's get into the fun of the seasons, right? We've talked about the ingredients. We talked about all of the different options that we have as bakers and product developers to create seasonal treats. But as summer, same principle. If you think of summer, what is a summer season? What does that represent to you? To me, summer, I'm thinking of pineapple upside down, pineapple summery, tropical fruits, mango, citrus fruits, key lime, lemon meringue. Even think about it, summer, everybody grows now basil and mint fresh. I've done it in cakes. It's amazing. A little bit of basil, a little bit of mint goes a long way. So anything that is refreshing can be fun into a bakery. And summer is colors, so you can go with brighter colors, you know, the meringue, the coconut macaron. So tropical fruit, you know, think of vacation vibe, sipping a drink by the pool and just relaxing. And that's what to me, summer what brings the summer and what makes you happy. So everything citrusy, everything fresh is always good for summer. But season, let's think through it. You know, when you think about fall, I know at the beginning I mentioned, the cozy and sort of the pumpkin flavor, which is sort of the obvious to fall. When fall comes on, you see all the ads for, I guess now Starbucks, they're starting it in August now in the summertime to say, hey, pumpkin is coming. But it's true, it's pumpkin, it's cinnamon, it's apple, it's the finishing again, the seasonal things that we as kids have learned from our grandparents. We as kids have learned from our great grandparents, our parents, when they baked with fruits. Like last week, I still made an apple pie because it's a season. Went to a local orchard, and here where I live in Philadelphia. But what does fall represent for you? What fun, innovative products could you put on the market that represents fall for your customers? It could be also some visual. I've seen people do cupcakes and do with a buttercream, a little pumpkin on the top of it, on top of a pumpkin muffin. So sky's the limit when it comes down to innovating around fall. Cookies are great too because they're easy to make and they can represent chai cookie, for example, or maple, pecan. See, I'm starting now I'm like, wow, there's so much that can do around fall. Now, winter, we're getting into, the colder months. So we're seeing a lot of the Christmas time, the fruit cakes, sort of the brandy flavors, type of thing, panettone, the brioche, which are seasonal items. And there's also, I'm going to butcher the name, the Lubunche, the German little spice cookie as a seasonal treat. So there's a lot of warmth, because, again, I'm thinking the fireplace, sitting there, being comfortable. Gingerbread houses, huge in the time of winter. The Yule log or bûche de Noël for I think it's December, winter. It's the busy season for seasonal treats. My all-time favorite, the King's Cake, la galette des rois for French speakers. It's my favorite seasonal treat. It's unbelievable, and every year I'm looking forward to January and for the month of January eating King's Cake. And let's go now to our spring season. Well, spring season, I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, PEEP comes out with it. But when I travel, I often go to Jamaica. They have in the spring, a great Easter cake. Easter type of cakes. There's a lot of traditional seasonal Easter cakes, and in Italy, in Greece, that are made, even breads that are made for the Easter season. And that's where it's not just limited to cakes. It's, lots of seasonal type of bread, especially when you go towards Europe, Middle East, where you'll see a lot of seasonal things that people are only making a certain time of the year. So spring season, again, using the early fruits, a lot of the berries. Lemon is great. The hot cross bun, again, it's an Easter type of thing. Lots of opportunities all throughout the season. And by thinking of your core menu and implementing items of seasonal items that could it doesn't have to be 50, but you could have 4 seasons for like we're going through 4 seasons and add 1 or 2 items for the season. Watch the sales being generated. And that's what people want. We get excited. It's a nostalgia. We feel connected with products because of flavors we like, because we all go through the season, unless you live in a place where it's, always hot, but I don't know where that is. Now we'll move to the season. Let's look at, all the products let's say I was able to motivate you to go through what are seasonal treats, how can you make seasonal treats, and what the seasons you could do, but now how do you maintain the quality of the product? One little statistical data, today in the food industry, we waste around 40% of what we manufacture or what we produce. So there is really massive amount of opportunities to think, how could I formulate my product so I'm not making it as much? I always tell my friends, bakers, whether the large commercial bakeries or the smaller one, if you make buns every day, what if you thought of having 3 or 4 day shelf life and change a few things within your operation and do your production twice versus doing it every day? See, it's about saving you time so you can better focus on things like seasonal treats. But let's go back to what makes quality product. It's important. I know not everybody has access to it, but it's important to know what's your water activity, what's your moisture content, what's your pH, and go from there to know how long can my product work, and what's my shelf life, and what can I get out of it. And sometimes by having experts talking to you about those type of attributes to your products, your data, or looking at it for you, we can easily make recommendations and changes that will bring real impact and real savings to shelf life of products. Shelf life of products is not just limited to putting a lot of ingredients. It's sometimes, in the case of sourdough, a sourdough bread, if you make a regular bread straight dough process and put it out, by 24 hours, the bread is as hard as a table. If you do a sourdough, your bread can last 5 to 7 days stored in a proper environment. So quality of the products and having a quality program is always great if you can. If not, have someone who's involved in quality, going through, even as quality, checking all the ingredients, the incoming ingredients we listed, the fat, your flour, how do you store it? We didn't talk about it, but this now, as quality, we have to start having a good program, first in, first out for your yeast. So many things to do in a bakery in order to produce consistently quality product. So we have here questions, that we'll read through as problem solving. And problem solving is just to get you in the idea of, if there's a problem, it's knowing the proper experts, so being connected with the experts that can guide you when things like that or questions like that arise. So right here it says the water activity in my cookie is low. There's no mold, but why does it smell bad? And things like that. As a bakery consultant and the owner of Baking Innovation, we have a group. We're used to seeing things like that come to us, and it's important to understand and know where to find your answers and know who to talk to when you're in that situation. Because what we make, yes, it's baking, but as we're going through, baking is fun and it's creative, but it's also science. It's also chemistry. Putting ingredient, as I always say, it's the proper art and science of baking. You have to be an artist to make it taste good and visually appealing, but you have to also use the science to make it last longer and make sure your product is safe to eat and can be transported everywhere in the local distribution or in the national distribution. Well, I thank you very much for having listened to the Seasonal Treats webinar. I'm the host, Richard Charpentier, and I welcome any questions from this point on. Well, it's a very good question. How you would extend the shelf life of your pumpkin bread, just like as the last slide that we were discussing. The first thing I would do is, in order to know how to extend the shelf life of your pumpkin bread, is to understand where is your water activity and where is your pH and what's the moisture of your product. Without that, I can only recommend anything you can throw at it. But as a good friend of mine told me, what we do is very similar to what doctors do. We need to check, time and temperature. So right here in that case, we need to look at what are the analytical data that your product is showing that your product can last longer. And by understanding those numbers, it's much easier to help you reformulate and get you to your desired goal. The gingerbread man, it's basically similar to the name I butchered, the German seasonal cookie. It's important to know at this point, I would want to know, how do you bake it? Do you bake it properly? Because when I've worked, if you're trying to not get it rubbery, it sounds like you have maybe too much moisture. And I'll share an example. I worked with a product years ago for a manufacturer, and the product had to be crispy. And for a while, almost like a gingerbread, the perfect snap, like a pita chip. But if your moisture content of your product is not proper, and we were going to like 2.5% moisture. As soon as you were close to 3, which you're only looking at a 0.5% of moisture different, it would completely change the texture and making it rubbery. So not knowing what your product is going through, I would bet on checking the moisture to understand that before applying any new ingredients, before fixing it. Similarly that I've answered, and I'll go a step further. It seems like you're bringing a lot of fruits, and as you're bringing fruit, pumpkin puree, it contains a lot of extra moisture you're bringing through. Apple puree brings moisture. It's not just sugar. So it's thinking, what ingredients am I bringing in, and how will those ingredients interact with my finished product? It's great if it makes it a nice product fresh, but what happens to your product after 3 days? What happens to your products later on? So looking at moisture, understanding water activity and pH of the component, as if you have multi-components, you would come to equilibrium. Equilibrium means when the water activity of your products comes into one, as moisture moves around in your product. Once I would determine that, there's a lot of other ingredients such as encapsulated sorbic acid, potassium in combination with potassium sorbate that could be used to prolong your shelf life of your product. But again, it's by knowing those things, because different acids work at different pKa, meaning they're more effective at different pH. So if your pH is too high and you're putting sorbic acid, it might not be the right solution. And again, first thing is understanding what are the analytical data from your product, and let's make an assessment and fix it. Good question. So, and I'm assuming that your panettone is done as a sourdough traditional way. And if it's done through the long fermentation and the proper way of doing a panettones after baking have a tendency to collapse. A lot of the manufacturers of panettone, and if it's baked into that paper mold, they tend to invert it. So from the time the top is here, they invert it to let the panettones cool properly, because of all the fruits and all the enzymatic activity of the cake tends to collapse. That's a first thought. But simple tool is check the internal temperature as you're about to pull your panettones from the oven. You want to make sure you're at least at about 195 minimum, and no lower than that, because as you check the temperature, that means it might go up. But 200 to 205 will be a safer bet. If that's what you get, that means, as the first step, as I was explaining, it means your fermentation might be off, or you might have to invert the panettones to cool down as they come out of the oven. So as a coffee cake, you're using a leavening system. And a lot of leavening system that we discussed today, the chemical leavening, there's different source. We didn't go into the details about the different types, but some of them do contain sodium aluminum phosphate, which aluminum is classified as a metal. And it could be, maybe there's an interaction there, because if you're smelling metal, the only metal you're bringing in is aluminum. as a leavening acid. I would start thinking, switch to another non-aluminum one, try the same recipe, and see if it happens. And if it doesn't, then you found the solution. If it still happens, then I recommend you call me, and or you call a consultant and you search for why, because that shouldn't be happening. That means you have a chemical reaction continuing. Something is happening that is not right. It could be your water, it could be the fat, but yeah, not a good thing to have a metal smelling baked goods. So preventing pumpkin pie to crack requires a lot of time and dedication to do it well, but it comes down to baking temperature and how much pans are you in your oven, how much moisture is in your product. I've seen people put a little bit of moisture to keep it low. And what I found is on pumpkin, I made recently a pumpkin cheesecake, and I realized they were perfect, not cracked. But as soon as one time I rushed and I went to the higher amount of temperature to go a little faster to set up, and they cracked. So the moisture in the product, once you reach 212, will just go into the boil, even before go to a boiling point, and then try to escape. And as you're sealing a crust, any cakes or anything like that, you're forming a crust, a structure, and they'll try to escape. And often it's about reaching the temperature and baking perfectly. But I would also look at your formulation, not knowing what it is. You might have too much of one thing, and it might need to be optimized a bit just to adjust it so it doesn't crack during your baking process. Yes, so you have different particle sizes, and what you want is, from what I remember, you have the number one and you have the number two. I forgot which one is the proper, which one is the smaller one. But usually the particle size, the smaller the particle size, that means the better distribution and the faster the rate of reaction. The longer the particle size, that means you have less, basically you're taking particle sizes. If you have a 10,000 small particles of baking soda, and which is more, I'm making it up. Once you go smaller particle size, it's like what chocolate chip. You have the 5,000 count, the 1,000 count, they're larger chocolate chip, all the way to the 10,000, which they're very small. You can still put a small amount, but it's going to distribute better. So it's going to change your rate of reaction. It's going to be, what do you prefer for your products and how do you react? If it's a cake donut, you might have to go with a different one because you want a quick reaction. It's a quick fry time. So your release and your production rate of reaction for CO2 has to be fast enough for your product. So sometimes changing that. And also, as a practice, we talked about encapsulation. I've seen it as a practice. A lot of people are mixing and putting their baking soda into the fat in the creaming stage in cookies or cakes. It's great, but by encapsulation, you're delaying also the rate of reaction. So sometimes the process is as important, equally important as the formulation, balancing, and knowing which one to which to buy. Yes, but you will have to use encapsulated sorbic acid, because sorbic acid as an ingredient alone will affect the yeast. Yeast, being biological, does not do well. So in short, sorbic acid could, so similarly to vinegar, kill yeast and yeast activity, not reduce it, well, reduce it to a certain amount and kill some of the yeast, creating other problems. So please think of encapsulated sorbic, might be better, especially for a yeast-based product, and often put in combination with potassium sorbate is preferred. So you would have to rebalance. If it's too crumbly, that means you might not have enough fat, you might not have enough eggs, you're missing something. because if they pipe well, they have to pipe well, easy enough to pipe. And once you bake it, they have to set, not expand too much. And once you get them out, they have to be sturdy. So if you have something there, that means maybe too much sugar, something is making it so you're too brittle. And I would rethink of rebalancing my formulation at this point. Well, I thank you very much for having listened to the Seasonal Treats webinar. I'm the host, Richard Charpentier.